free to be whoever you want to be. Feel free to dance, feel free to sing, just feel free. Feels like the world is picking on you.
All right, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Two-Tone Talk podcast, episode 16. The first, well, I guess technically second episode of the off season for the Tennessee Titans, whose playoff hopes came to an end a week ago tomorrow, whose season came to an end a week ago tomorrow. Hope you're all holding up well, Titans fans, in the face of this off season. And what a start to the off season it's been, as I will get into that in a moment. First of all, I want to thank everybody for listening. If you're listening on Spotify, Apple, SoundCloud, wherever you're listening, I appreciate it. And if you're watching on YouTube, thank you for tuning in. If you're not watching me on YouTube, please go subscribe on YouTube, Two-Tone Talk, and go follow me on Twitter at Two-Tone Talk. So we got to talk about, because I have not done an episode since the firing of offensive coordinator Todd Downing, in addition to a few other coaches who were let go by the Titans, but the biggest one was the firing of offensive coordinator Todd Downing. I think it's one that we all probably thought would happen, but there was that little inkling of doubt, wasn't there, that Mike Vrabel was going to give the guy another chance to come back next season and try it again. I think this is a firing that probably restores some hope in Vrabel as a head coach, restores some hope that he is able to hold his coaches accountable the same way that he does the players. Because, I mean, listen, I've seen a lot of people complain that Vrabel in his press conferences, he's quick to hold his players accountable. He always talks about how the players need to play better, we need to execute better. Even in his end of the season press conference, pretty much threw Derrick Henry under the bus a little bit, talking about his fumbles and inconsistencies there. And Vrabel does that a lot. He holds his players accountable publicly in the press conferences, and I think a lot of people would love to see that same energy toward the coaches. It seems to me that Vrabel, for whatever reason, it appears he holds his players accountable publicly, but he holds the coaches accountable privately. That's what it would seem to me. He doesn't have as much of a problem going into a press conference and saying, we need to hold, inside linebacker accountable. We need to hold tight end accountable. We need to hold our left guard accountable. He doesn't have as much of a problem doing that publicly, but it appears that in private is where he kind of holds his offensive coordinator, secondary coach, offensive line coach. That's something that he kind of handles in private for whatever reason. Either way, I think a lot of us were a little nervous that because Vrabel is so hesitant in the public eye to hold his coaches accountable, I think a lot of us were a little nervous that, man, is this guy going to blame it all on the players and not hold Todd Downing accountable? And as Will Dotson said in the YouTube chat, Amy Adams Strunk had a lot to do with this firing probably as well. I think Amy Adams Strunk, she's somebody who's proven, and I talked about this on Monday and in the past multiple times. I mean, the Titans are building a new stadium in a couple of years. Amy Adams Strunk fired John Robinson in the middle of the season, and the statement she made pretty much said, we want to take the next step we can't take the next step with John. So we're not satisfied with being mediocre. We're not satisfied with being anything less than one of the tippy top teams. So Amy Adams Strunk, I think, is, and that's why I kind of said this offseason, I wouldn't totally take anything off the table, because I think Amy Adams Strunk is a person who kind of wants to be aggressive in making this team better. She wants to make moves if the firing of John Robinson is any indication. So I have no doubt that Amy Adams Strunk was probably a voice in Mike Vrabel's ear saying, hey, we need to get rid of Todd Downing. Now, let me say this. I have ranted so much about Todd Downing on my other channel, which is mainly used for music and stuff like that. But I did a Titans video every week of the regular season over there after games. And I've been hard on Todd Downing. I've been hard on Todd Downing on this podcast every week. I've ranted, I've raved, I've called him an imbecile. And when I finally got the news, I think it was Tuesday, or maybe Monday, that Todd Downing had been fired, of course I was happy. But it was a weird feeling, because it was like, you kind of just feel like a bad person celebrating someone being fired. I mean, what other line of work? I mean, like, you would never go into a Lowe's, witness an employee get fired, and be like, yeah, woo! You know? So it was weird, because the whole Titans fan base, who, granted, has been desperate for something to celebrate for the last 2 months, when Todd Downing was announced as being fired, it was like, yes! It was like winning a playoff game. And I do want to say this. We're fans of our teams. We get carried away. I do wish Todd Downing the best. I hope that, I hope that he lands on his feet, and I believe he will. I hope that, everything's fine. And I have watched a couple of my videos back and heard some of the things I said. It was like, man, that's kind of harsh. I've listened back to some of my videos and been like, man, that's kind of intense right there, bro. Like, you don't have to get too personal. I do think he needed to go, but I probably could have toned it back a little bit. But either way, I hope Todd lands on his feet. I hope everything works out for him. As for the Tennessee Titans, they have an opening at offensive coordinator, and it appears that the first thing that they want to get handled is hiring a new GM, which is understandable. They've had interviews all throughout the week. They're continuing to have interviews today. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not going to sit here and pretend to know a lot about these people that they're interviewing to be the new GM. I'm not going to pretend. I'm so dumb when it comes to this stuff. Getting a sip of coffee here. I'm so dumb when it comes to this stuff. I mostly just look at the team that they're coming from and judge it by that. Like, they were interviewing a guy from the 49ers, and I was like, oh, I want that guy, because he's with the 49ers and they're good. They were trying to interview somebody with the Bills, and I was like, yes, hire that guy. He's with the Bills. They're good. I don't know if that's a good indicator of whether somebody's good at their job or not. But I'm not going to, I'm not going to pretend to know a lot about the GM situation. But I think seeing the vision that Amy Adams Strunk has, knowing she is the owner and she's going to have probably the biggest say-so in the hire, I hope, that she hires the person who's going to come in and make the changes that need to be made, and I think she will. I think that, Amy Adams Strunk's statement she made about hiring a new GM, where she said, we're looking for somebody who will collaborate with other people, who will communicate about the decisions they're making with the roster. As I said before, I think that indicates that John Robinson probably maybe didn't do that a lot. And so I think that, they're going to be looking for somebody who handles things a lot differently than Robinson does. So I'm anxiously awaiting They have. I feel like. I mean, that'll be very soon that they'll announce a new GM. They're obviously conducting interviews today. They're conducting interviews throughout the weekend, and so by the Senior Bowl, you would think they're going to want to have a new GM in place to kind of get this thing going. That's the first act of business. In terms of offensive coordinators, I have mentioned Frank Reich, a former head coach of the Indianapolis Colts. I do not think Frank Reich is a very good head coach, but I wouldn't mind trying him out as an offensive coordinator. Now, some of you are going to disagree. Some of you are going to agree, and that's fine. But that's just a name that's just a name I threw out there. I've seen some people throw out the name of Cliff Kingsbury, who just was fired by the Arizona Cardinals as their head coach. That's interesting. I don't know. It's tough for me because he had a couple of years there in Arizona where he had a ton of weapons on that offense and couldn't really, make any noise in the playoffs or anything. But also, they're throwing out the name of LaFleur that the Jets just fired as their offensive coordinator. I'll just say, after watching the Jets offense, now I know the Jets are in a bad way at quarterback, but after watching the Jets offense this year, I'm a little hesitant about that guy. And then, of course, there's Tim Kelly, which is probably the most likely option because he is in-house, and Vrabel always likes to go in-house with guys that he trusts and knows that are already in the system. My only hesitation with that is exactly what I just said. Vrabel always goes with the in-house hire. He always goes with the guy who's already there. And sometimes that works. But sometimes I wonder, when he does that, I always say, are we going with the best option or are we just going with the most comfortable option? Now, if Tim Kelly gets the job, I'll be more hopeful. I think that, it will be an upgrade, but I just wish that I could have a feeling that we're not just hiring the most convenient guy because we don't have to get to know him. We already know him, and he already kind of knows the philosophy of the team. Man, I would kind of like to see somebody new come in instead of just, we're going to give it to the guy that's already here. But that being said, Tim Kelly, I'm not saying Tim Kelly's a bad option, okay? But I think it would be a breath of fresh air for a lot of Titans fans to see Vrabel go outside of his bubble and bring somebody in. But, like I said, GM obviously first priority, and then we'll probably start talking about offensive coordinators. But Todd Downing fired, and, this was something that was a long time coming. I think we all knew, back in, week 2, that this was on the way. I talked about it ad nauseum on Monday's show. This offense was absolutely pathetic this season. Some of that's due to the injuries. Some of it's due to the offensive line. And I want to say this. I don't know if you guys realize this, because offensive line coach Keith Carter was also fired. And Taylor Lewan and Will Compton were hosting an episode of Bussin' with the Boys with special guest Josh Dobbs when that news broke. They were in the middle of the podcast when the news broke that all these guys were fired for the Titans. And so Taylor Lewan was able to give his legitimate first reaction in the moment as it happened. And he had some very interesting... Well, first of all, he had something interesting to say about Todd Downing, because he literally said Todd Downing pretty much knew it was a done deal, because Lewan said he went in a couple of weeks ago to a practice and he was wearing a poncho and he's lost some weight. And so Downing was joking with him and he was like, "Are you going to play tight end?" And Lewan said, "Yeah, I'm going to come play tight end for you next year." And Downing pretty much said something to the effect of, "Oh, are you going to be playing at such and such high school?" Because it was Downing's way of saying, "I'm probably going to be offensive coordinator at a high school somewhere." So Luan was speculating that the handwriting was on the wall and Downing knew. And it makes you wonder if maybe Vrabel had kind of told Downing, like, hey, when the season's over, we're probably going in a new direction. Who knows? But Luan seemed to believe that Downing knew what was coming. Now, as far as offensive line coach Keith Carter, Luan had some very interesting things to say about him. He pretty much said that he had a hard time getting along with him for much of his time there, and said he didn't do a very good job or could have done a better job taking care of some of the older veteran guys on the O-line. I think we can surmise by what Luan said that maybe some of what the offensive line is doing in practice during the week was contributing to all of the injuries that were happening on the offensive line. I mean, he said this guy was working them so hard at practice that in the game they were just already kind of wore out. That's from Taylor Lewan. And if that's true, makes you wonder what somebody like Ben Jones would have to say about it. And if it's true, it's like, okay, is that what's happening with every position group? Because obviously the Titans for 2 years now have had injuries all over the place. And it makes you say, okay, so is every position group being worked too hard in practice and then going down a game? I don't know. But I just thought what Lewan had to say about Downing and Carter, very interesting. And, so now Downing's out of there and the offense has to go in a new direction. I said this last week. I don't know if Derrick Henry's going to be back. My gut feeling is that he will be back. But even if he is, this team has got to stop relying on him so heavily to win games. I'm not saying he shouldn't get his carries. I'm not saying he shouldn't get a good bit of carries. But it's 2023. It's not 1975. We've got to adapt this offense and stop turning a blind eye to the passing game. We have got to stop relying on one guy to literally carry us to the promised land. I'm not saying he shouldn't be back. I'm not saying we shouldn't bring him back. I'm not saying he shouldn't get his carries. But we have got to make a better effort to get this pass game going so that, I am so sick of hearing people talking about the Titans on SportsCenter or whatever, and it's always the same thing. Well, their offense kind of just runs through Derrick Henry, and this is their thing. This is who they have. It's like, man, I love Derrick Henry, and he is one of the biggest parts of our offense. Absolutely. But my goodness, it's been 5 years of this. He can't do it forever because nobody can do it forever. Okay, obviously Derrick Henry showed this season he can still go, even behind this crappy offensive line. He still finished second in the league in yards. Imagine what he could have done with a competent offensive line. But even if he's back, can we try and think of other ways to win games instead of just relying on one guy? It's 2023. It's not 1975. I talked about the quarterback situation on Monday. The more and more it goes on, there are a lot of people who believe that Tannehill is going to be the guy. That they're just going to bring Tannehill back and that's going to be what they do. I'm not sure I'm so sold on that. I don't know if I'm buying that that's just the surefire thing they're going to do. Because of the fact that Amy Adams Strunk seems to be aggressively trying to make this team take that next step and urging Vrabel to do so as well. I'm not saying they're not going to bring Tannehill back because they very well may, but there's just something in the air that makes me think they may try to do something other than Tannehill. something other than Malik, something other than Dobbs. I think, like I said on Monday, there's been a lot of rumors about guys like Derek Carr, Jimmy Garoppolo, and I left some guys out. Geno Smith's going to be a free agent, and he's had a good year. I mean, there's a lot of names being thrown out there. I want to talk about a couple of new names that have been thrown out. Not new, but, more aggressively. And that is, first of all, of course, Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson, I got it wrong the other day. I thought Lamar Jackson still had another year on his contract with Baltimore, and therefore it would have to be a trade if he went somewhere. I didn't even think about the fact Lamar Jackson's actually going to be a free agent. Not a trade, a free agent. And so that means that you wouldn't have to give anything away, but in a way you would, because he's going to want to get paid a good bit. And yes, I love the idea of Lamar Jackson coming in. I love that idea. I just think the problem there is there's some key guys that you're not going to be able to re-sign if you bring him in, because he's gonna bring a lot of money his way, and I just don't know if it's in the cards for the Titans to pull that off. I'm not an expert on cap space, not an expert on the financial aspect of football, but I just can't imagine that it's in the cards. Now, they need to try. But and you want to talk about a good run game. If you had Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry, sheesh, you kidding me? At other positions, there are rumors about guys such as DeAndre Hopkins, that the Cardinals are going to be trying to trade DeAndre Hopkins. A lot of Titans fans, and a lot of rumors that the Titans are going to try to make a move for DeAndre Hopkins. Vrabel coached at Houston for many years when DeAndre Hopkins was there. He knows Hopkins. I understand that. I know DeAndre Hopkins is just a monster wide receiver. He's something. And the biggest part of me is like, man, that would be awesome to have DeAndre Hopkins. But I'm having a little bit of PTSD because you look at DeAndre Hopkins like, okay, here's this guy who has been a top 5 receiver for most of his career. He's had this Hall of Fame career. He's an unbelievable wide receiver, but he's getting older and he's had a ton of injuries, and that's kind of hindered him. Who does this sound like? Oh, you don't have to go back very far to find who this sounds like. This sounds like Julio Jones coming to the Titans. Now, I will say Julio was and is more injury prone than DeAndre Hopkins. I don't know if there's anybody more injury prone than Julio for the last few years, but it just feels so similar to that. And the Titans have just, how many times have the Titans brought in somebody who had a great career, enough to get the Titans fans excited, and then it's like, oh, they're kind of washed. Adrian Peterson, Randy Moss, Andre Johnson, Julio Jones. Now are we going to add DeAndre Hopkins to the list? Now listen, if they end up making a trade for Hopkins, my hopes will be high. Because I know what he's capable of. He played for Houston all those years. We had to play Houston all the time. And I remember he used to have me wanting to throw stuff at the TV. Okay. It worries me because it's so similar to Julio that, it worries me. Other guys at other positions. Today, there's a lot of rumors about cornerback Jalen Ramsey, who has made a tweet insinuating that he will not be back with the Rams. And I don't know, somebody that knows better in the YouTube chat, let me know. I don't know, is Jalen Ramsey going to be a free agent? Is he seeking a trade? I don't know. But Jalen Ramsey is from Nashville, lives in Nashville. I think he did an episode of Bussin' with the Boys years ago where he expressed that he would love to play in Nashville someday. So that's got the rumor mill going that the Titans might try to make a move to bring in Jalen Ramsey. Now, I think this secondary needs somebody like Jalen Ramsey. We do not need another rookie. We don't need another young guy. We don't need another unproven guy. We already got McCreary, who's got work to do. We already got Farley, who's got a lot of work to do. We've already got Trey Avery, who shows promise, but he's young. I mean, we've got, and then Christian Fulton, who you don't know if he'll be back. He's hurt all the time. You know, this team needs a bona fide stud corner. And, I mean, Jalen Ramsey fits the bill. That would be somebody like that, a veteran who knows his stuff. That's the kind of guy this secondary needs. But it's just, it gets to a point where it's like, okay, so you want to talk about re-signing Jeff Simmons, figuring out what you're going to do at quarterback, trading for Hopkins, maybe trying to make a run at Lamar Jackson. Some people want him to trade up in the draft and take one of those quarterbacks. Some people want him to get Jalen Ramsey. It's like, okay, I'm not an expert on cap space, but I know they can't do all of these things. Because they've got key guys that they've got to work out deals with. Jeff Simmons, obviously, I mentioned. But, I mean, you know, David Long and all that. But there are some guys on this team that, like, they can cut ties with them and open up a ton of cap space. And I saw a list of who those guys are. And to me, I looked at the names and I was like, this is a no-brainer. Robert Woods was one of them. Bud Dupree was one of them. Zach Cunningham was one of them. Ryan Tannehill was one of them. There was about, I'm trying to think of who the others were, but there were 6 names. It's like if the Titans cut these guys, they could open up so much cap space. And I looked at the names and I was like, why are we even considering? We need to cut ties with all of them. Bud Dupree and Zach Cunningham are hurt more than they're healthy. Robert Woods really didn't do much of nothing. Tannehill, I think we're ready to go in another direction at quarterback. I'm like, let's cut ties with all of them then. Why are we even bothering? We'll see. I have no doubt the Titans will cut ties with some of those guys, but you know, we'll see what the future holds. But there is a way they can open up some cap space and try to make some noise. But again, I'm not an expert on cap space. I'm not an expert on the financial side of things. But I do know every player that comes available, there's rumors of them in the Titans fan base going to the Titans. And I'm just sitting here, I'm like, oh, listen, I know the Titans can't get all these guys, okay? They can probably only bear to get like one of them, okay? And I want to acknowledge again the trade rumors that the Titans might possibly try to trade up in the draft. I'm sorry, I just think from number 11, with so many teams in front of them that need a quarterback like Indianapolis, like Carolina, and I mean, there's some others there that could make an argument. I just think that it's too big a jump to make. Chicago's probably going to want too much. As much as I would love to have a guy like Bryce Young or Stroud, I don't know how much you'd have to give up to get from number 11 to jumping up there. I just don't. I hate to say it, but I think it's much more realistic for Indianapolis. I'm sorry to pull that off because they're at number 4. 4-1's not too big a jump, but 11-1, and even if they had stayed at 10-1, that's just such a big jump to try to hurdle over other teams that are going to be competing to get there. And there's been some rumors for Chicago, and I know it's early, we've got months to go to the draft, but been some rumors that Chicago might stay up there and take Bryce Young and then just trade Justin Fields. I know Justin Fields is an incredible athlete, and he's had some incredible runs this season, but he plays quarterback, and in terms of throwing the football, I think Justin Fields has left a lot to be desired. So Chicago, they're going to have the option of, hey, we're going to stay right here and we're going to take Bryce Young. And he's going to be our quarterback and we'll send Justin Fields elsewhere. It's going to be a wild offseason. It's going to be a wild offseason in general, but in particular for the Tennessee Titans, moves they could make, it's going to be very interesting to see. Okay, let me break down what's going on this weekend. It's the playoffs. It's the Titanless playoffs. And I'm one of those guys, I am going to be glued to the TV for the playoffs no matter who's playing. There's nothing like playoff football. So I don't know how you guys are. Some people, when their team's out and if they don't make the playoffs, they find another team to kind of latch onto. For me, it just varies by game. There are teams in these playoffs that I really don't like at all, so I'll root for anybody playing them. Then there are some teams that, I kind of like. I think a lot of people are going to be rooting for Buffalo because of the DeMar Hamlin situation, and I understand that. And that would be an unbelievable story for the Bills. But let's look ahead to this weekend. Obviously, the Eagles and the Chiefs both have the week off. They're on a bye. Let's start tomorrow, Saturday. The first game, the Seahawks and the 49ers. I'm trying to think of a way that Seattle could win this thing. The 49ers have won like 10 straight games. They're rolling. Seattle snuck in at the end. I think the 49ers have too much firepower. I think the 49ers have too much firepower. It's in San Francisco. I just think the Seahawks, who have had a remarkably good season. I mean, I thought the Seahawks were going to be one of the worst teams in the league. So kudos to them for even being in this position with Geno Smith at quarterback. And I've said it before, if I'm the Seahawks, I would strongly consider bringing Geno back because I think he's played really well. And Pete Carroll is apparently the quarterback whisperer because he had Russell Wilson looking elite. Now he's had Geno looking really good. But at the end of the day, I'm going with the Niners. I think the 49ers get the win here. I just think that Seattle in San Francisco, they are going in as the underdog. And sometimes in these playoff games, these underdogs come in and they know they're underdogs. They have something to prove. I mean, that's kind of reminiscent of the Titans a few years ago in 2020 when they made the run to the AFC title game. But I don't think the Seahawks are going to do it. I got the Niners winning this one. Tomorrow night, Chargers and Jags. This is where the Titans would be if they had beaten the Jags, but they didn't. So it's Chargers and Jaguars. The Chargers are not going in with any momentum. They lost to Denver in the last game of the season. Jacksonville, obviously they've won 5 straight, don't we know? And everybody's picking the Jaguars to win. It's going to be a fun little deal. Justin Herbert versus Trevor Lawrence. Maybe it's just the Tennessee Titans in me. I'm going with the Chargers to win this game. I think that Jacksonville is so young. They have hardly any playoff experience on the team. I think Jacksonville is just going to be glad to be there. I'm not saying they're not going to play hard, but, I mean, keep in mind, though, Chargers don't have a ton of playoff experience either. Justin Herbert, this is going to be his first playoff game, just like it's going to be Trevor Lawrence. I don't know. I think I've seen the Jags. They're really excited about winning the AFC South. I feel like, there's another step that they need to take up. The Chargers probably coming in with more to prove because more people are doubting them. For whatever reason, I'm taking the Chargers over the Jags. Sunday, Dolphins-Bills. This game would be really fun if the Dolphins had Tua. But they don't, and so for that reason, I think this will be the most lopsided game of the weekend. I got the Bills all over the Dolphins. In Buffalo, DeMar Hamlin is home. Thank God, what an unbelievable situation that is. Bills comfortably over the Dolphins. Nothing more needs to be said. It's Skylar Thompson versus Josh Allen. I mean, come on. The Dolphins have won one of their last 8 games, and it was the season finale against the Jets, and they won by in the low, like 9-6 or something. Give me the Bills comfortably. Sunday afternoon, Giants-Vikings. This is like a battle of the teams that nobody believes in at all. Daniel Jones versus Kirk Cousins in Minnesota. This one's a struggle for me because it's in Minnesota. I do believe the Vikings are the better team, but it is Kirk Cousins in prime time. And as you know, that can get ugly. But I don't believe in Daniel Jones at all either. So it's tough. I just think Minnesota with Justin Jefferson, they got more weapons. I'm taking the Vikings. I've seen a lot of people picking the Giants to win this game. I don't think it's that cut and dry. I'm going with the Vikings. B Ravens 1 in the chat says apparently Mike Williams for the Chargers was ruled out. Chargers were stupid to play their starters last week. Well, that's a prime example of why you don't play your starters in Week 18 when you have nothing to play for. Maybe I need to go back and change my pick to the Jags. I might do that here in a second. Let me think about it. Sunday Night Football, Ravens-Bengals. We talked about Lamar Jackson earlier. This is another game that would be a heck of a lot more interesting if the Ravens were going to have Lamar Jackson, but much like the last however many weeks, they're not. And I just think the Bengals are rolling. I mean, Burrow's cooking. Like I said, the Ravens without Lamar, they just lost to the Bengals last week. It's in Cincinnati. Give me the Bengals over the Ravens on Sunday night. And then Monday night, Cowboys-Bucks. Bucks have looked bad for most of the season. Cowboys have looked good for most of the season. Brady is 7-0 against the Cowboys in his career. You can feel it in the air. The Cowboys have had this promising year. They feel like this might be it. But I feel like the Cowboys on Monday night are going to do what the Cowboys do in the playoffs, and that is find some way, somehow, to blow it. Give me the Bucks over the Cowboys. Monday night, the GOAT rides again. And I said this last show. People have rumors that Tom Brady could end up a Titan next year. I don't think it's a good fit, and I think he's getting old, has gotten old. Here's the thing, though. If he goes and takes the Bucks to the Super Bowl, I will be willing to revisit that discussion about Brady again. That's my picks for the weekend. Chargers without Mike Williams. I think I'm going to change my pick on that one to the Jags because Mike Williams is one of the only guys on that Chargers offense who does have that big game experience. Yeah, I'll change my pick to the Jags. As bad as I hate to do it, all you Duval folks, I'll change my pick to the Jags. Everybody enjoy playoff football this weekend. I know we all wish the Titans were there, but look at it this way. At least we don't have to try to make ourselves believe that the Titans are going to win a playoff game when we know they probably wouldn't with the roster that they had assembled. That's it for episode 16. Enjoy the playoffs. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Two Tone Talk Titans podcast where we're staying way too high on the wins, way too low on the losses. I'll see you guys all Monday. Thank you for tuning in. Bye, everybody.
Whoever you wanna be, feel free to dance, feel free to sing, just feel